You realize you have a lot of competition tonight.
No, what's going on?
There was a CJP interview with Deborah Lipstadt that just finished.
Oh, okay. Well, if it just finished, perhaps it doesn't constitute competition.
Well, yeah, and also I think there's the MIMO first of the MIMO meet potential candidates for head of school. I think is also tonight.
Yeah, that's probably true. All right. Well,
and that's even at 8.
It's being recorded, and you know, it is what it is.
Or maybe you could run for that.
I did the running a school thing for 3 years. That was plenty. All right. Let's get started because it's 8:03. Maybe more people will turn up, maybe they won't. And if not, it's being recorded. Speaking of which, in the event that you're watching this at some point in the future, and you would like the document that we're looking at here, you can email me at deborahklapper@gmail.com. This is part 11 of our series on the first chapter of Sanhedrin, and we are going to spend, I believe, all of this evening on page 6b in Sanhedrin. It's a fairly long page. And we are continuing our discussion of the question of whether judges should try to mediate a compromise between litigants instead of actually judging the case. We had sort of last time been touching on what sort of panel you would need for a mediation and how you would go about it. Tonight, primarily our topic is whether such a thing should even exist at all. We're going to have some plays on words. We're going to have some assertions about whether or not justice is really a good idea. Well, it'll be fun. All right. So we begin with Rabbi Eliezer ben Osher Rabbi Yosei Haglili, who says the following. He says, "Asur livtsoa v'chol habotzea harei zechutei." It's forbidden to compromise, and anyone who does compromise is a sinner. We will see later that it seems we're only talking about in a courtroom, not in life in general. And we may only be talking about judges recommending a compromise. Nonetheless, it does seem like a rather extraordinary statement. And anybody who blesses the person who is compromising, I assume that means praises them, that person is minaitz, they are blaspheming. So this pasuk in Tehillim is a rather difficult to translate pasuk, and we are going to make several different things of it over the course of the evening, but let's have the whole pasuk. We're in Tehillim chapter 10, verse 3. And I will do my best to at least point out where there might be ambiguities, although I do not think I can translate it into English in a way that is ambiguous the same way as the Hebrew. The verse goes, Ki hilel rasha al ta'avat nafsho, when or if or because, unclear, the evil person praises the desire of his soul, uvotzea vereich nietz Hashem, and a botzea, which I'm not going to translate for the moment, blesses, well, maybe he blesses the blasphemer of Hashem, or he blesses that is blaspheming Hashem, something like that. One way or the other, it seems like either blessing a botzea is bad or a botzea blessing is bad. And botzea here in our piece of the Gemara so far means somebody who is mediating a compromise between litigants. It will mean other things as we continue through the Gemara, but here it means It means someone who's mediating a compromise, and it seems in the parallel language of the pasuk that the botsea is parallel to the rasha, that somebody who is mediating a compromise is the same thing as an evil person. Just using the poetic structure of the sentence, that seems to be what's happening, regardless of what any of the other words mean, which are rather unclear. Ella Yikov Hadin et Tahar. This is still, by the way, Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Yosei Haglili, talking. He says, rather, the justice ought to pierce the mountain, right? Justice should be the powerful thing that can, blow a hole through the side of a mountain. This is presumably in an age before dynamite, just a metaphor, although we do now actually blow holes in the sides of mountains. But not usually with justice. Shne'emar ki hamishpat leElohim, because it says in the pasuk in Dvarim, because justice belongs to God. So if justice is godly, then anything other than justice must be blasphemy. And that presumably includes such generally ideal things as mercy and compromise and deciding to just be nice to the other person and not take them to court, right? Like, justice, strict, like legally prescribed justice, is actually much of the time in human life a last resort in real life. It's not necessarily a first resort. It's not necessarily a good thing, but except in the world of Rabbi Eliezer ben Osho Rabbi Yosei Haglili. But we're going to modify this a little as the evening goes on. But he seems at this point to be taking a very powerful stand that the only thing that's godly is justice. Yes.
But Deborah, to make the statement, if justice is good, then anything but justice is blasphemy, is not really correct. It's that if justice is good, then the opposite of justice is bad.
Well,
not necessarily anything other than justice, but the opposite.
So maybe I'm inclined to agree with you. The problem is that we then have to define injustice. And if injustice is something which is egregiously against justice, then okay. But if injustice is just the failure of things to turn out exactly the way they were supposed to, then we're back where we started from.
Right, but compromise in this sense is the human attempt at finding justice.
Maybe. We will see later that there are people who think that. But suppose that I stole a diamond necklace from you, and now I've, sold it to pay for the food for my starving children, and the necklace is gone, and I can't pay you back. And the best that I could do is agree to, I don't know, whatever, cook you dinner every Tuesday night for the rest of my life or something, whatever, not a diamond necklace. And we would agree to that. So you're clearly not getting what you deserve. I'm also clearly not getting what I deserve, but it's still, you and I might think that would be a good outcome, is a merciful outcome, but it's not justice.
No, it is compromise, but if that's what is agreed, then all parties have agreed.
Yes. Okay. So we will get
right. Okay.
to a little bit of a sharper definition of when justice is absolutely necessary, and I think you'll like it better by the time we get there.
Okay.
But we're starting with the strongest statement of the position.
Also, that you're using the word "deen" has more of the Hebrew has more of a connotation of strict justice than maybe it does the word justice does in English.
Could be.
Because it's used in our prayers, for example, especially in Yom Kippur.
We're kind of blurring distinctions between vocabulary here once we start treating din and mishpat as the same thing, which they clearly aren't in Torah. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how precise our use of language is. Okay, so, but Rabbi Eliezer Benosh Rabbi Yosef Haglili goes on to say, "V'chein Moshe haya omer yikov hadina tahar." So then Moshe himself used to say, "Let justice pierce the mountain." To the best of my knowledge, that's not a pasuk that appears in Tanakh. It's just an assertion that this is a position that Moshe used to have. And maybe Moshe certainly is seen in Parsha Yitro sitting in judgment. And so presumably he does care about that. On the other hand, he recommends mercy instead of justice to God on a number of occasions. So I'm not entirely sure that this is the only possible presentation of Moshe, but this is the presentation we're giving. Aval Aaron, Ohev Shalom v'Rodef Shalom, u'mesim Shalom ben Adam l'chavero. But Aaron is the guy who loves peace, and he pursues peace, and he puts peace between a person and his fellow. And Rashi thinks that this is presenting Aaron by contrast to Moshe, that because Moshe's the judge, he's not allowed to pursue anything except justice. But his sidekick and older brother can run around trying to solve everyone's problems before it ever gets into a courtroom to begin with. And he is allowed to pursue compromise because he's not the judge. So it might be that we're not saying that justice is the only thing that's acceptable. It might just be that we're saying justice is the only acceptable outcome to be advocated by a judge. And that certainly significantly mitigates the statement. Shne'emar, and then we have a pasuk from Malachi, which let me just open it here because I want to get the vowels right. Malachi 2:6, and the pasuk is Torat emet hayta b'fihu, the Torah of truth was in his mouth. Ve'avla lo nimtza b'sfatav, and sin was not found in his lips. V'shalom u'v'mishor halach, he walked with peace and straightness. With me. V'rabim heshiv me'avon, and many he turned away from sin. Kisiftei kohen, this is the next pasuk, which is not quoted here, but it's the reason we think this is Aaron. Kisiftei kohen yishmeru dat, because the lips of a kohen will preserve knowledge. V'torah yivakshu mipihu, and they will ask for Torah from his mouth. Ki malach Hashem tzvakothu, because he is an angel of God. Right, that certainly sounds like a description of somebody who the prophet is really very pleased with. He's an angel of God. He turns people away from sin. He preserves knowledge, and everybody wants to learn Torah from him. It actually, quoting this pasuk, makes it sound like Aaron, the guy who tries to stop people from ever getting to justice to begin with by solving their problems for them. Aaron is the better teacher of Torah, certainly. He is the better presenter of how to not sin. It seems like even Rabbi Eliezer Benosh Rabbi Yosef Haglili here is acknowledging that Aaron's way is better, and that you get fewer people doing sins and more people learning Torah and more people connected to Judaism, and people are like the angels of God. Just a judge shouldn't do it. Someone else should. So this is definitely a huge mitigation of his position. Okay, so that's the end of his statement about justice versus compromise. We're now going to go off on a tangent, which has absolutely nothing to do with our topic, but uses the same pasuk. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer, I believe this is a different Rabbi Eliezer, says, Haresha gazal se'ah shel chiti. Somebody stole a se'ah of wheat. A se'ah is a volume, relatively large volume measure that's used for grain. I don't know how big it is. V'tachana v'afa'ah, and he ground it and he baked it. V'hifrish mimenu chala, and he separated challah from it. Hitzad mevarich. What bracha should he make? I would have guessed it was what bracha should he make on taking challah. Rashi seems to think it's what bracha should he make on eating it. Doesn't matter either way. The response of the Gemara is Ein ze mevarech ela min ha'etz. That's not, what do you mean, what bracha should you make? You don't make a bracha on stealing. That's blasphemy. Ve'al ze ne'emar uvotzea birech mi'etz Hashem. And on this, the Torah said, a botzea who blesses is blaspheming God, because bet tzadi ayin also means to break bread, right? You know, when you make a bracha on the challah at the Shabbos table, and then you cut it up and you pass the bread around, the shoresh that describes that behavior is bet tzadi ayin. So this is the person cutting bread and blessing who is blaspheming, is the person who stole the flour or stole the wheat from which to make the flour. And as I said, that has absolutely nothing to do with our topic. It's just another interpretation of the same. Okay. Rabbi Meir has another interpretation of the pasuk based on another play on words, or another possible meaning of the root bet tzadi ayin. Rabbi Meir Omer lo ne'emar botzea ela keneged Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says it only says the word botzea to reference Yehuda. Now, we're going to read in a few weeks in the Parsha about the brothers selling Yosef, and just before they notice that there are the caravan of people that end up carrying off Yosef, to whom either they do or don't sell Yosef, depending on exactly how you read the psukim. But just before that, Yehuda is sitting there at the table eating, and I don't know if there's an additional play on words intended, because they are sitting there breaking bread, but he's sitting there and he says, you know, guys, ma betza ki naharoget achinu. What betza, what profit do we get by killing our brother? Right? Betza is also bet tzadi ayin. So a botzea is one who profits, then profits, like earns money. So Rabbi Meir is saying that this pasuk that says that a botzea is bad, that's talking about Yehuda. Shne'amar vayomer Yehuda lechav ma betza ki naharoget achinu. V'chol hamivarech et Yehuda harei ze min ha'etz. And anybody who says that Yehuda did the right thing is blaspheming, because Val ze ne'amar uvotzea birech mi'etz Hashem. Because it says he blessed a botzea, he blasphemed God. So that one can almost picture Rabbi Meir saying this in response to somebody in his classroom saying, well, it looks like Yehuda saved Yosef's life here. That seems pretty good. One can almost imagine Rabbi Meir saying, you there back there in the third row, you're a blasphemer because you're blessing Yehuda. I don't know for sure that that's what happened, but that's what I like to imagine. In any case, that's also just a tangent, not connected to our topic. But we are coming back to our topic now. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha said mitzvah livtzah. He says, unlike Rabbi Eliezer ben Osho Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, who said that it's forbidden to compromise, Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha says it's a commandment, it's a mitzvah to compromise. Shne'emar emet u'mishpat shalom shiftu b'sha'arechem. So, because Zechariah says, judge truth and justice of peace in your gates. So justice of peace seems like an odd phrase. By the way, I did a little very surface Googling to see if there might be a connection between this phrase and the English position of justice of the peace. And not that I could find, but I'm still curious. In any case, but, and this is really an extraordinary statement, it's not possible to have justice and peace simultaneously. How can you have justice of peace, where anytime you have justice, you don't have peace, and anytime you have peace, you don't have justice? Presumably because justice means taking something from one person and giving it to the other person. and that has a tendency not to end the fight, but to make one person very happy at the expense of the other person who is now even more unhappy than they were previously, and that's not really peace. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, so what's justice that contains peace? That would be compromise. And it also says about David in the 8th chapter of 2 Samuel, David osed mishpat tzedakah. David would do justice and charity. And the end of the pasuk is l'chol amo, to all his people. And so the Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha says the same thing about justice and charity that he said about justice and peace. You can't have them both in the same place. And so instead, it must be, what is justice that contains charity? Nope, that is compromise. And, everybody gets a little bit of something, and so everyone gets a little mercy, everybody gets a little bit of justice, and everyone goes home happier than they were before. So we come back to the first position, who I'm not sure why we aren't naming him. We had a name for the first Tana. His name was Rabbi Eliezer ben Oshel Rabbi Yosei HaGlili. In any case, we've come back we have to come back around to him. Danet hadin zikat hazakai v'chiyevet hachayav v'ra'ash nitchayev ani mamon v'shilem lo mitoch beito ze mishpat tzedakah. Okay, so he said, if the judge had already judged the judgment, and he had already found the innocent and found the guilty, I shortened that a little in the English translation, and he saw that the poor person ends up owing money, and then he reached into his own pocket and paid the debt of the poor person, that's justice and charity. Mishpat lezeh u'tzedakah lezeh, because it's justice to one of them and charity to the other one. Mishpat lezeh shehechzir lo mamon. It's justice to this guy, that the guy who was owed the money, because he got his money back. U'tzedakah lezeh sheshilem lo mitoch beito, and it's charity for the other person because the judge gave him the money to pay, which he otherwise, I don't know what would have happened, but it would have been bad for him. So now we have sort of three positions. This is the position we started out with, which is that judges should just judge. Maybe other people should try to, resolve society's problems through unjust means, but judges just have to judge. They're not allowed to do anything else. Then we have the next position, which is judges shouldn't judge. They should always encourage people to compromise whenever possible. And now we have our third position, which is the judge should judge, but hopefully he's rich enough to fix the problem afterward and make sure that the poor people don't suffer too bad. Which sounds good, except in what legal system do judges make the kind of living that would allow them to operate this way? This is asking an awful lot of people who don't get paid very much. So it sounds good, but it doesn't really seem like a very practical solution to the problem.
Deborah, is there, I know this is really not so much an issue, but is there any reason, I'm just stuck on the switch between, we started off with the word din to refer to justice, and we quickly transitioned over to mishpat.
So I think what is going on with that is that the normal Mishnah and Gemara word for what they're talking about is din, but it keeps being referred to in the psukim as mishpat. And so they're just using that language while they're quoting psukim. Din is a much, much less common word in Tanakh than it is in rabbinics. So I think it's just about time periods.
Okay.
We haven't seen the word mishpat used anywhere except directly interpreting a pasuk that contains the word mishpat.
Could it also be a Hebrew versus Aramaic dialect thing?
It could, although the word din does exist in biblical Hebrew also, especially around the name of Dan. When he's originally named, and later when he's blessed, and then later when Moshe blesses his tribe. There's some plays on words there. And so it's there in biblical Hebrew right from the beginning. I mean, I guess you could say, well, Leah named him Dan because she spoke Aramaic, and maybe, but even so, it's there in the Hebrew from when she put it there. I think it's just a less common word than mishpat. As opposed to when Tanaim and Amoraim speak in their own voices, using their own vocabulary, their normal word is din.
So when it says V'chen Moshe haya omer Yikov hadin et hahar, that's the Tanaim referring to Moshe. That's not necessarily biblical Hebrew.
Correct. It's not biblical Hebrew at all, and none of it is anything that Moshe would ever have said.
Right.
It's
right.
not. Har is a biblical Hebrew word. And Nun Kof Bet exists as a biblical Hebrew root, but it's not at all clear to me that that particular conjugation exists.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that unusual to put rabbinic sentences into Moshe's mouth. But I would say that's what's happening there, is that we're making him speak like a rabbi instead of like a biblical character. Okay, so Kashi Leila Rebbe. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi had a problem with this. He says, "Hi lechol amo la'aniyim mibayale." So back in our pasuk about King David, we said, right? David said, he said, "Vayhi David osem mishpat u'tzedakah lechol amo." David was doing mishpat and tzedakah to his whole people. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, if your interpretation is correct, and what that means is that if a poor person ended up owing more money than they could afford, he just paid it, then it should say he did mishpat and tzedakah for the poor, not he did mishpat and tzedakah for everybody. So Rebbe has a different interpretation. Ela Rebbe Omer, Aval pi shelo shilem mitoch beito zehu mishpat and tzedakah. Rebbe says, even for the people that David didn't pay their bills, he was still doing mishpat and tzedakah for the litigants in the case. Mishpat lezev, tzedakah lezeh, because he was doing mishpat for one and tzedakah for the other. Mishpat lezeh shehechzir lo mamono, v'tzedakah lezeh shehutzi gzela mitachat yado, and it's a tzedakah to the other person to remove the stolen property from him. Right? We're doing him an act of charity by reversing his crime so that he's not a criminal anymore. Which that's a very different vision of what it means to do charity, right? That's just like, I'm doing you a favor by punishing you, is not quite as charitable as I'm paying your debts for you. At least not in our usual conception of charity. On the other hand, it's a slightly better interpretation of the first because it's true now of every case that he judges. Okay, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says, "Shnayim sheba'u lefanecha l'din, if two come before you in judgment, ad shelo tishma divrehem, before you hear them speak, or after you hear them speak, but you don't yet know which way justice leads, meaning you don't know what the answer is yet. You're still allowed to tell them. It's not clear whether he thinks you're supposed to, but you're allowed to tell them, go out and make a compromise. So it might be that Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh is trying to find a middle ground between it's a mitzvah to compromise and you're never allowed to compromise positions, or it's possible that he's making a claim that they're both right and they're just right about different parts of the process, and he's he's turning the whole thing into one position instead of a machloket. It is not clear to me exactly what the relationship is between this and the previous two positions is. Either way, he says you are allowed to tell them to go compromise as long as you don't know who's right and who's wrong yet. Misha tishma divrehem. On the other hand, once you've heard what they have to say, and you know which way the case is going, you can no longer tell them go compromise. Poter mayim reshut madon v'lifnei hitgala hariv netosh. It says in Mishlei that the beginning of a dispute is like the release of water. It's that idea seems to be that once you break the dam, there's no going back. There's a sudden and extreme change of state. Once you let the case start. So the solution is to leave before the fighting begins. Although, in fairness, Rav Shimon ben Manasseh isn't saying that you have to leave before the fighting begins. What he's saying is that you have to leave before the conclusion becomes obvious. So he's using this pasuk to, say something slightly different than what it actually seems to have meant. Kodem shenitz gala hariv atayachol lintasho. Before the fight starts, you can abandon it. Misha tigla hariv iatayachol lintosho. Once the fight starts, you may not abandon it. By the way, I know it looks like there's an extra yachol in this line. There's an extra yachol in the Gemara, and so I left it in. There seems to be a manuscript issue going on there. So we have now either a compromised position, which claims to represent both of the previous positions, or just a different position that you're allowed, if you want to encourage compromise up until the point where you know how you're going to decide the case. And once you've decided the case, then justice, I guess, exists in a way that it didn't previously, and now you can't deny it anymore. Up until that moment, justice is a theoretical construct. It's okay to get rid of theoretical constructs, but a real justice where you know what the answer is supposed to be, that you have to follow through.
It's interesting. Yes, and it's interesting that they make the analogy to a fight, whereas to me, the first thing I think of is, well, once you know the way the outcome is going to be,
mm-hmm.
you're biased, and you can't tell them go compromise because it's introducing bias right away. And in the interests of justice, you just can't do that. But to liken it to a fight seems like a misplaced analogy. It's not the right comparison at all. If you're going to be fair, then you have to be fair the whole way through. And once you know the outcome, you can't lean in any one direction by telling them to compromise. Certainly, if you know the outcome is going to favor person A, and then you tell them, well, go compromise, person A may not end up getting what they're supposed to be getting. Like there's a bias there once you know it. And it's in the interest of justice, not in the interest of backing out of a fight.
Right. So I'm not sure how closely to take the analogy to the fight. It might just be that we're saying there's a point of no return in this
Right, right.
dispute. And the point of no return in a physical fight, maybe when the first punch is thrown. The point of no return here is
Once
the
you
moment
know the outcome.
when
Yeah.
you know the outcome. Because at
Agreed.
that point, up until that point,
Yeah,
it's, Schrodinger's court case. The cat may be alive or dead, but once I know the cat's dead, I can't tell people it's alive.
exactly, exactly. Okay, that was, I just wanted to make that point, that to me was more a question of, the knowledge. Sorry, the
Yeah,
knowledge that you have, which biases you.
yeah. And I think you're right. Okay.
Okay.
Right. And so then we have another similar interpretation, although we're no longer talking about compromise here. But you'll see that everything else about this case is very similar. Shnayim sheba'u ledin. The two people who come to court. Echad rach ve'echad kashe. One soft and the other hard. This seems to be about their behavior and or their capacity to hurt people. Ad shelo tishma divrehem. Before you hear their words, o misha tishma divrehem v'ata yodea lehechana dinoteh. Or once you've heard their words, but you don't know which way the verdict is going to go. Ata rashai lomar lahem einam nizkak lachem. You can tell them, sorry, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Shema nitchayev chazak v'nimtza chazak v'rdfil. Because maybe the stronger guy, who I assume is the kashe from the first line, is going to be found guilty, and then he's going to try to attack the judge. Right? You can be it's legitimate to be afraid of a litigant and to refuse to judge a case for a litigant before the case starts. But Misha tishma divrehem. But once you've heard what they have to say, and you know which way the justice is going, you at that point you can't say, I don't want anything to do with you. Because you, and this is the beginning of the pasuk that we had up above, right? It's lo taguru mipnei ish ki mishpat laHashem, right? Because you don't be afraid of a person, because justice belongs to God. And so it brings us full circle back around to where we started this evening. Justice is God's, and you owe it to God to do justice. And you can't avoid justice because you're afraid of people. But that's only if you already know what the just thing to do is. But until you know what the just thing to do is, you're allowed to just not find out if the alternative is to get in trouble with one of the litigants. I have a little personal experience with this, in which I was summoned to be on a grand jury about 4 years ago, and I was initially, they were forming two grand juries that day, one for healthcare fraud and one for organized crime. And they were forming the organized crime grand jury first, and my number was very, very low. I was going to be called for the first grand jury. And they got to me, and the judge looked at me and said, is there any reason you can't serve? And I said, well, I'd love to serve, but I can't serve on this day of the week because I picked my nephew up from school. And she said, okay, fine, you're on the other grand jury. I was very, very pleased to have nothing to do with organized crime. And I think at that point, it was totally legitimate, since there was no specific case in front of us, and there was nothing, I didn't know anything in particular. I didn't have any opinions. I just wanted to judge cases about healthcare fraud instead. But if I had been impaneled on a grand jury on organized crime, I hope I would have had the courage to follow through and serve. In any case, the idea here seems to be that you can't deny justice, but sometimes in life, it's better not to know what the just thing is to begin with, so that you can find a different way out. Or if we're going to go all the way back to the beginning, sometimes in life, it's better not to be the judge, and it's better to be the guy who finds the extrajudicial solutions to people's problems. And not just because it makes people like you better, although it certainly does seem to have made people like Aaron better. And not just because it works, because it also produces peace and happiness, but also because it produces more Torah learning and more mitzvot, and it better achieves God's goals. Right? That's the irony here, is that the pasuk about the Kohen in Malachi that we started with Aaron seems to indicate that he's the most successful guy at God's goals of communicating the Torah, of spreading the Torah, of convincing people to do the right thing, convincing them to stop doing the wrong thing. And never mind that we have a little bit of a problem at the Golden Calf about that with Aaron, but in general. And so we have this theoretical justice that has to be paid lip service, and that we have to make sure we don't explicitly undermine. But at the same time, we know that it doesn't actually serve its own purposes most of the time. And so sometimes you need to avoid, you need to sort of circumvent the whole justice thing in order to get a better result to take place. And that's a delicate and tricky matter. All right, that is what I have for the evening. Do people have questions?
Yes, so both stories, Rabbi Menasya,
I think it's Shimon ben Menasya.
Shimon ben Menasya and Reish Lakish, in both situations. I think you may have even said, I don't know, they clearly say Ata rashai lomar lahem. So it's not clear what they're trying to tell us here. Because in your summary just now, you said sometimes it may just be better to compromise instead of judging the case.
Yeah,
but
so I think
they're not, yeah, sorry.
Ironically, I think the second position for sure that said it's a mitzvah to do compromise, he thinks compromise is just better. But also, ironically, the first guy who says that compromise is forbidden also seems to think that compromise is just better. It just can't be done by judges.
Yeah.
But you're right. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya seems a lot more conflicted about it.
Yeah, it's almost like a concession. You may say to them, like a concession. So what does that mean? That the judge just isn't sure, or the judge is afraid, or what is it that would lead a judge to say, sorry guys, I really don't want to do this, yet he's a judge?
So I can think of an assortment of things, even without the fear of the litigants issue, which is certainly there in Reish Lakish's case, but I don't know if it's there in Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya's case. But other than that, we have an overloaded court system. We have, you're likely to continue hating each other after litigation if you litigate, but if you mediate, you might reach a place where you actually don't mind each other so much. We have just the enormous waste of time and energy of making everybody gather together and have a formal court case and take everybody's testimony and everything. And it might also just be that you see that these people are decent people who, for the most part, are not fighting kinds of people, and you think that it just might be more in keeping with who they are.
Yeah,
go talk it out instead.
Yeah, I'm really leaning towards, and something that the judge is getting from hearing them.
Maybe, although Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya is the one who thinks that you once you that be something that you hear from them in the context of the case really should be the only thing that can't cause you to ask them to compromise. But that said,
Yeah.
if you have a rich guy suing a poor guy, you could say, look, the best case scenario here is that the poor guy wins and everybody hates him. That's his best case.
Yeah.
So, he's probably, no matter
Right.
what the outcome, probably better off with a mediation.
Right. So probably something about the nature of the case rather than the nature of or the situation with the courts. Like
And it may also be that you think in general that being found guilty never makes anybody do tshuva, and that just finding a more human middle of the road solution to whatever the situation is more likely to result in everybody being a decent human being afterwards. You might
Right.
believe that in general about all cases.
Right,
Didn't we just
exactly.
read in the Haftorah?
That
What, Harvey?
Didn't we just read in the Haftorah? There's where Elishahu and the woman who is she's apparently lost some case like this, and her children are going to be taken away as to pay for her debt. And he doesn't go and cancel the debt with the creditor. He provides her with the means to pay it off.
Yes, although I have some questions there, because taking minor male children as slaves to pay a debt is, to the best of my knowledge, never permitted in halacha. So I think the prophet there may just be totally powerless against an unjust legal system, and he doesn't have any other way to help. Remember that Elisha is functioning in the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Yisrael, which doesn't really have nearly as much connection to Judaism as you might want it to have. And the secular powers that be are often quite evil there. So I'm not sure that I would take that as a paradigm for what to do, even if you have a legitimate and functioning court system.
And also, I have one question about another question about so since this whole discussion involves a dispute between two people, I assume this is, we're talking solely about monetary issues, where somebody thinks someone else owes them something or some amount, and that we might have different things to say if it were a criminal case, where it's just a defendant and how many lashes you give him.
Yeah, so the cases we're talking about all seem to be cases with two litigants. That said, the distinction between criminal law and civil law is not necessarily drawn in the same place as it would be in American law. It seems very, very clear in our Gemara that theft is being treated as a civil case. And there are no lashes for theft, just a fine. So, but yes, it does sound like it's all about money. Okay. Anyone else?
was great, Deborah. Thank you.
Mazel tov, and again, are you having fun?
I am having fun. Yes. I changed a diaper on my lap in a car for the first time in 15 years. And yes, I am having fun.
It should just continue. I'm sure it will.
I hope so. He's really cute.
Where do they live?
At the moment, in my house, in the room directly underneath the office I'm sitting in at this moment. But they're going to move to Cambridge, which is where she's in graduate school. But for the moment, they're here.
You have them nearby. Lucky you.
Well, most of the day, lucky you.
Oh, I'm a very deep sleeper and he's a very quiet child, so we're good.
He looks so thoughtful in that picture you sent out.
He's really very chill. He likes to sort of like lie there and stare at the side of his crib. He must be thinking something important, but I don't know what it is.
Well, enjoy.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody. I will see you next Monday.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.